Welcome to On Texas Football. Time for the Saturday morning conversation brought to you by our friends over at Duck Camp, duckcamp.com for your hunting and fishing gear. Today, we're going to talk about expectations in 2024 and whether or not the Longhorns, we think, met them, exceeded them, or came up short in a number of different ways. But I think that here we are, Gerry Hamilton and Rod Babers. We're looking at it right now, and we're looking at a team that's 13-2 in the college football semifinals, that they could still win this national championship. So we can't say definitively that they've met or exceeded all expectations. But I think that any of us would say, given what we know right now, this season has been an unmitigated success for the Longhorns. What are your thoughts, Gerry?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you get back to the national semifinals, and when this thing started, when you got back to the playoffs, you're the only team to do it back-to-back years. Now you're the only team in the semifinals back-to-back years. I mean, that is a successful season. So now it's what comes after that is kind of the key. But yeah, I think so for sure. I mean, look, you went up and won at Michigan. I don't care what their team looked like when you did it. You went and won at Michigan, the defending national champs. And then you win your rivalry games. You won all three rivalry games, by the way: Oklahoma, Arkansas, and at A&M. So it's been a wildly successful season for the Texas Longhorns. And yet the two Georgia losses sting. I get it. But getting to the SEC championship a game in year one, success. Being the last team standing in the SEC right now, success. I don't think I couldn't go any other way but to say Texas has met expectations this year. Now let's see how high they can ascend.
What do you think, Rod? You agree expectations at least met, if not surpassed?
Yeah, no doubt about it. It looked, I think, very different than what a lot of Longhorn fans, including myself, thought it would look like. All right, I think the journey was very different. But I think ultimately they ended up exactly where we thought they'd end up, competing for an SEC championship. Didn't win it. I believe I had them 11-1 at the beginning of the season. And as the season went on, I was adjusting expectations as well. But I think ultimately they got to where we thought they should be and where we thought they would be, back in the Final Four, competing for a national title. I'll admit, though, I did not see it looking this way. I didn't see Gunnar Helm, being one of your lead receivers. I didn't see Trey Wisner being 1,000-yard rusher. I thought the offense would be led more with, Quinn's elite throwing ability and his arm talent, along with the prolific group of wide receivers. That happened somewhat, but not as much as I thought. So the offense didn't look the same way. So it's expectations. They definitely met or hopefully exceeds those as the season goes on. But I'll just admit that it looks very different. The journey is very different. I thought, who knew the defense would be this elite? Who knew the defense would end up basically that's your identity, is your defense. Who knew that would happen? Who knew the secondary would have the greatest turnaround, arguably, in the history of college football for a pass defense? I didn't see those things materializing. So it's fun, because you get the surprises. I like to go into a movie, even though based on the trailer you went and watched, it's like, oh yeah, I know what's going to happen in the movie. I kind of get it. And then when you go and watch, you go, oh, but that was some clever writing there. I like that. That was pretty clever, even though we all kind of knew what the plot was going to be. I still got surprised pleasantly by it.
I like where y'all talking about, and we'll go over the offense and defense in particular, and then really talk about the program as a whole. I think those are all important aspects of what this all rolls up into. One of the pieces that I think it was very key to happen this year were the two playoff wins. I mean, look, Sark hasn't won bowl games at Texas. These are his first postseason wins other than the Big 12 championship last year. So I think winning in the postseason is one of those next steps that you take as a program. And hopefully it keeps on and going from here. But I definitely think they've at least, to y'all's point, at least met high expectations. These were not low expectations for a season. No. So it's not like, oh, well, a year ago I was thinking maybe they get to 10-2, maybe they win the Big 12, right? They exceeded those expectations. I thought going to the SEC, even though they had a schedule that we were hopeful about, you still had some reticence, I think, naturally, because you're going into another conference. You're going to see whether or not you're replacing a defensive front. That two key guys there. So overall, I think that cumulatively they've no doubt at least met expectations. And you know what? There's still more out there for them if they can get it done on Friday against Ohio State. Let's talk about offense in general. Rod, I'm going to start with you because you kind of led our way into that. You talked about how the offense wasn't necessarily what you envisioned in the preseason and what it's become. So what do you make of that at this point? Are we seeing something that is Steve Sarkisian pro style? Give what is it about this offense that doesn't hit or miss the mark that maybe what you thought?
Yeah, I think it's gone. The offense went through a journey this year. I think, with the Cedric Baxter injury and the injuries to running back early on, I even think based on the numbers, pass run ratios and early down pass rate early in the season before the Quinn Ewers injury, the offense looked very different. It was a different offense. And then you had the Quinn Ewers injury. And then I think after that, after Quinn kind of had to find his groove and find his rhythm as a quarterback, the offense went through another transformation, kind of another metamorphosis. And then late in the season, found the running game, found their groove in the running game. Then the kind of the ascension, you saw the ascension of great players like Gunnar Helm and Matthew Golden kind of take on those roles of the go-to guys within the offense. So it's really interesting that I just think we've seen it change. Hopefully now they're starting to solidify their identity, and we thought that was the case in Arizona State. They didn't have that running game. They just had the clutch gene. They had to rely on, kind of going back to what you said, Bobby, they just found ways to win the game. And that's where you are right now at this point. I mean, you are what you are. And I think maybe it's a frustrating thing is I don't know if we ever settled on an identity. I don't know if we ever settled on an offensive identity. Not that that's a bad thing. I'm not criticizing it, but I don't know if there's one thing that you can hang your hat on and say, this is what Texas does better than any other team in the country or as well as any other team in the country. They're just, I think, explosivity. They're just an explosive offense more than anything, but the running game just got going and it's been inconsistent, and you didn't have it versus Arizona State. The passing game, love it, but sometimes, Quinn, sometimes is inconsistent and a little bit erratic depending on how the pressure is getting to him. So you don't want to be over reliant on the passing game, but when they had to be explosive, they were. So maybe their identity is they just come up clutch when they need to, and they're just impossible to stop throughout an entire game. Georgia came the closest, but not even Georgia could do it for 4 quarters. Georgia did it for like a half, both games. They did it for the first half in the first game and the second half in the second game.
Yeah. Gerry, what do you think about the offense? How would you describe it?
Yeah, so look, met expectations, I would say from a win standpoint and a yard standpoint, probably. But in a lot of ways, no, but I think it was out of their hands. I mean, to Rod's point, like whenever in the building, when CJ Baxter went down, if you think about coming out of spring, Sark had the thing set the way he wanted. He had Isaiah Bond, the speedster on the outside. He had Matthew Golden, who proved to be exactly, a great red zone guy and the most dependable receiver. You had DeAndre Moore filling into Whittington's role. You had Gunnar Helm filling into Jatavion Sanders' role. You had Juan Davis come up in the program and find a role. Then you had Cedric Baxter. And I'm telling you, in the building, they said, guy reminds us of Edgerrin James. I'm not saying he was going to be that good, but that's how much value they put in Cedric Baxter. So then you get to the season, Baxter's gone. Bond gets hurt against OU. Quinn gets hurt. Last year also, the same offensive line starters the entire season. Not the case this year. As the season moved along, Banks is out. Cam Williams is out. Trevor Gooseby, a young tackle, has to play both. Jake Majors gets knocked out of a game. I mean, so they had a lot of adversity they had to deal with. But more than anything, I think it changed how Sark could maximize his offense. And I don't think he's been able to maximize the offense the way he envisioned it due to injury adversity this year. So it's hard to say that they kind of met the expectations, because I don't think they met Sark's expectations other than winning football games.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it is about winning.
About
right?
winning.
And they came up with key long drives in key games.
Yep.
To either salt away a game.
Yep.
They had an explosive run there at the beginning, not against the non-conference opponents that really knocked them out. Even Michigan going up 24-3 at half or whatever, 24. So I can't remember what the number was. The reality of it is, it seems like they've had enough at the right times.
Yeah.
Except Georgia.
Yep.
That's essentially it. Now we'll see what happens against Ohio State. The die has not been cast yet, right? There's still more to this story, but I do believe I agree with what Rod said, and I agree with you as well, Gerry. They did not necessarily meet expectations in the way we expected, and some of it was out of their hands.
Yeah,
some of how it went with the Cedric Baxter injury in particular fundamentally changed who they were going to be. Now they've made the most of it with Trey Wisner, and Trey Wisner's made the most of his opportunity.
Yes.
So hats off to Sark, Trey Wisner, and the whole offensive unit for kind of adapting, because when that injury occurred, we were like, wait a minute, either Jarrett Gibson's going to have to come on, or who do they have? Because we didn't know Trey Wisner could be this kind of guy. Trey Wisner having 1,000 yards this season, no chance.
And then Jay Blue ends up with 1,000 all-purpose, basically close to 1,000 all-purpose yards as a player too.
Yeah. And by the way, Sark's had to navigate around an inconsistent field goal kicker this year, which he didn't have to last year.
That's one of the things that also I didn't meet expectations. There's only a few things that didn't quite meet the very high expectations, and I'll say field goal kicking is definitely one of those things.
Special teams as a whole, maybe.
Yeah,
because punting wasn't great, Rod. The fake punts.
One of the best kickoff return guys in the country hasn't had a big one this year.
Until
this game,
Yeah, you just got one, but that's true. I agree, because I expected Matthew Golden to have at least one, and you still got time.
Still got time
to pop one, and you really hadn't had him pop one, but he's been fantastic, obviously, on offense.
Yeah. All right. What about defense? Exceeded expectations clearly, right?
Yeah.
I think we all knew that Pete Kwiatkowski was building something, and we were like, what's his defense finally going to look like if they can start getting a pass rush? I mean, it's taken him 4 years to create a pass rush, essentially, right? I mean, they had somewhat of a pass rush last year. Now they've got I don't know if it's an elite pass rush, but there's not 10 or 15 teams pass rush you would take better than theirs. It has fundamentally changed the Texas defense and the outlook of it.
Got the edge now, right? They didn't have the edges before. They just had the interior. Now they got the edge. And they got linebackers that can also blitz if they need to.
So. Yep, absolutely. What do you think, Gerry?
Yeah, no, definitely surpassed. And I think it's a multitude of reasons. The number one you hit on, it's the pass rush. Trey Moore, after the win over Arizona State, he's up to 5.5 sacks now. Colin Simmons has 9. We thought Colin Simmons was going to be good. He won the Sean Alexander National Freshman of the Year over Jeremiah Smith, by the way, and Ryan Williams. I mean, that's the pass rush. They're second of the teams left. They're second with 44 sacks. I mean, they weren't close to that number last year if they'd have played this many games. They just wouldn't have been. So adding the 2 edge pieces, having the edge rush, being able to rush the passer without, I'm sure Rod will talk, without having to bring the extra hat all the time is huge. And then Jahdae Barron, his play at corner, that went zipped. I think that zipped past even the expectations of the Texas staff. I don't think they thought preseason, we're moving over here and he's going to win the Thorpe Award. I just don't think I think that this guy's going to be a really good player. But I'm not sure they said we're in there predicting Thorpe Award for him at corner. And then, look, the Leon Galafau coming on, I think has been, he's exceeded expectations. There's been the team itself has, then there's been individual players that have, which I think has to happen for the team too. But the one thing I look at with this defense is they haven't been put in great positions this season, and they've come through.
You talking about the defense, like backs against the wall and stuff?
Oklahoma, 2 turnovers in your own territory in a rivalry game. But Oklahoma was bad on offense, but they still couldn't score. Georgia at home. I mean, they They could have been down 34-0 at halftime of that game.
Yep.
And the defense kept them at least within 23, right? That could have been 37 easily in that game. Arizona State game, they had to play 97 snaps. A lot of teams, the dam would have broke before midway through the third quarter when you're playing that many snaps. They have not been put in great positions because of the offensive struggles, and they have exceeded expectations every time. Even the Arizona State game, I know they gave it 510 yards and 29 first downs, but that's just one of those games where you go for a punt block, you don't get it, you get a rough. Team gets 7 more offensive plays, right?
Mm-hmm.
They fake a punt. It works. You get 7 more offensive plays. I mean, like everything that could happen to make a team possess the ball and your offense sputters for 2 quarters happened. Clemson's the only game where defensively you said, that's interesting. We hadn't seen that all year. And only one game. I mean, they've from the players to the staff, the continuity. I've said before, they look like a really good half-court basketball team that just always communicate and they got each other's backs. They're on the same page. That's what they look like to me. It's hard to pull off.
It is. Yeah. To your point, Gerry, we didn't talk about it when talking about the offense and what didn't meet expectations. Only 7 teams that in the country have more turnovers than Texas offense. Yep. We don't even feel the ill effects of it, even though that is that's the one tragic sin you cannot commit in football, right? You'll lose any game, no matter what it is, based on losing the turnover margin. Texas has just continually turned the football over, or given the football away, I should say, all season. The only reason you haven't felt those ill effects is because of the defense, like Gerry says. And that's where I think, and I haven't really tracked it, but man, your defense has stood up strong for you after giving up turnovers, short fields as well. So I think that's where your defense, their sudden change defense, has been really good for you.
Yeah.
That is a great point. The sudden change point, because we saw that in a number of different aspects that look, Texas had some turnovers at wrong times. And outside of Georgia, they weren't really that costly. I mean, right? They weren't really that costly. All right. I want to say thank you. We got one more discussion topic we're going to hit on Saturday conversation, but I want to say thank you to Duck Camp. Duck Camp is made for the people that live for the moments out there where there are fish to catch, birds to hunt, deer to kill, time to kill, football to watch. They like doing all that stuff. So they built a company centered on it, based in Austin and dedicated to giving people best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel. There are those of you out there that look forward to the opening day of hunting season, to the college football playoff in football with the fervor and excitement of a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. Duck Camp is here to let you know that from opening day to game day, they've got you covered at Duck Camp. We believe you can't just sit around and wait for adventure to come to you. You have to get out there, stay out there, and make the most of each and every second. Here's to great seasons, y'all. Yes, hunting and fishing, as well as football. Shop hunting and fishing gear at duckcamp.com. Thank you for your sponsorship of On Texas Football and the college football playoff run here for the Texas Longhorns. All right, Gerry and Rod, the last piece of expectations is I want to talk about the program as a whole and where it's headed. Okay. And Texas went 12-2 a year ago. And you felt like they were on the come a little bit. They were doing things the right way. They had the pieces in place. They played well in big games. They won big games they hadn't won before. They went and beat Alabama. They hung on against a TCU team that was kind of coming back against them. They held on against Kansas State. They found ways to win in 2023 in games they had been finding ways to lose the previous couple of years. Okay. And maybe the previous decade for that matter. Okay. 2024, there weren't that many close games. They were in command. They had learned how to win, and that program took the next step. Where does it go from here, though? Are we going to see more of the same thing? Because Arch Manning's coming next year. There's no doubt about that. He's going to be the guy. What are the next steps? Is it just to sustain this high level and do what Mac Brown said is hang around the rim a little bit for national championship and figure out when you're going to be there? I mean, is that what Ryan Day's doing right now at Ohio State? Is that what James Franklin's trying to do at Penn State? Rod?
I think you figure out, you got to, because part of the journey is learning what you lack, right? What's keeping you from getting to the mountaintop. And sometimes that's something cultural. Sometimes that's a roster issue in terms of roster construction. And versus Ohio State, I think you've learned a lot about your roster construction and your philosophy, even in these last two playoff games. And I mean, we just take the O-line, right? Talk about groups that have met expectations. That's a Joe Moore Award finalist, right? Offensive line that Texas has. And there have been times that we as fans have wanted them to impose their will a little bit more as an O-line and be able to play bully ball. And that's not something really that they've been able to do against certain teams. Georgia, number one. All right. But that's another thing you realize, like, all right, we got to check that box. We checked a lot of boxes about it being a championship caliber squad. Maybe that's a box we got to, in the offseason, that's something we got to explore. Coming out of half, all right, third quarters, so Sark's like, yeah, that keeps us from winning a national title. And that's worth, exploratory rabbit holing and figuring out, all right, what's going on here? We got to do an introspective look about what are we doing at halftime. And Sark has done this. It's a beautiful thing about Sark, right? He talked about how they couldn't finish when he first got to Texas. And so he had to reconstruct, construct the practices and had to really reinvent the program to be a team that could finish and that could have the clutch gene in the fourth quarter. And they became that. A team that didn't have the clutch gene and couldn't close to a team that could close and that had the clutch gene. And by the way, that clutch gene, once you are able to cultivate it in your program, it doesn't go away. They just proved it again, right? Like they got it as a program. Like they know how to win, as you said, Bobby. So there's just certain things I think Sark is going to look at and go, yeah, we gotta check that box. And and not a lot of them, by the way. You're talking about maybe 4 or 5 things keeping you from being a championship caliber program. And I think that's what we'll learn against Ohio State too.
Yeah. So Rod covered all the things I would have covered. So I want to say this, where I think Texas football is gone under Steve Sarkisian. He has players building legacies, and that in a short amount of time. If you can't build legacies if you suck and aren't winning games. There's guys leaving this university or building legacies. Tavondre Sweat built a legacy for himself at Texas. He won a national award. Kelvin Banks won 2 national awards. Jahdae Barron built a legacy for himself at Texas, winning a Thorpe, being on 2 playoff teams. Quinn Ewers just had a legacy moment for him and has led Texas to 2 playoffs. Whether it doesn't matter that it's changed now and more teams are in the playoffs. He's the only Texas quarterback that's done that. I mean, so when guys build legacies and build generational wealth after they leave your university, you have a really strong program.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, and I would venture to say this, Gerry, that I'm not so sure that the best classes on campus right now isn't the freshman class and the class coming in.
Yep.
But you look at the sophomore class with not only a Cedric Baxter, who we hope heals, but guys like Anthony Hill, Arch Manning, DeAndre Moore has become a stalwart very quickly, in my opinion. Trevor Goosby's in that class now as well. Leonga Lafau, right? You start seeing Jelani McDonald, another name that's I just feel like they've got a group of guys and are building a program right now that is sustainable. And it's going to be big-time players making clutch plays at clutch times that get you over the top.
Yeah,
that's the difference. But before, they were just trying to build it up to get to they could be in the conversation. Now it's going to take big-time players to help you win it all. That is the test of time argument. You don't go back and look at college football national championship teams that don't have guys playing great, that are great players.
Yeah.
It very rarely, very, very rarely happens for you.
Yeah.
I mean, J.J. McCarthy last year, right? The defensive players that Michigan has had, the offensive line, those Tua coming in for Alabama. Devontae Smith at Alabama, Joe Burrow. You think about that. Great players that play great at great times are what wins national championships. Texas wasn't even thinking that direction 4 years ago.
Yeah.
They were thinking, how do we even get back to being a winning squad? Now it's how do we get all these things, to Rod's point earlier, how do we get all these things moving in our direction and get the right pieces to it? Rod B, Gerry Hamilton, thank y'all so much. And thank all of you for watching on Texas Football. And also thank you again to our friends over at Duck Camp for sponsoring college football playoff run for the Texas Longhorns. For Gerry and Rod, as well as Duck Camp and our producer, Matt Hutchison, I'm Bobby Burton. You guys have a good Saturday. Hook 'em.